Hey, I'm Ryan. I'm a tutor in the Econ Tutoring Center. Today I'm going to talk to you a little about different types of product curves and their relationships between each other. Remember that the language and notation we use might vary from what your professor uses, so always double check to make sure what we're saying is the same language as your professor's. Alright, so there's three main types of product curves here. We'll talk about the marginal product, the average product, and the total product. And all these curves show a relationship between labor, so the amount of workers you have, or the amount of hours spent working, and the total product or output. Or I should say product or output. So the first one, probably the most obvious one, is just total product. So it says that with a certain amount of this amount of labor, this many hours, this is how much output you'll get. So if you have maybe 2 workers, you get 100 units of output or something, or 20 hours worked, 100 units of output. There's a couple things you'll notice about these relationships here. First of all is that the total product, marginal product, and average product all start at the same point. So the average product is just what it sounds like. It's the average amount of output that you're getting per unit of labor, so per worker, per hour's work. So obviously this is below the total product, because if you have 20 hours worked, you might have an average of 10 products, but a total amount of products would be the total number of units of labor times whatever your average is. So that's the first relationship that's important, is that the average product at each one of these individual points, right, if I took this average, this is my average product at, say, 2 units of labor, right, I have an average product of, let's say, 10 units. Well then, this area is 20, but that also should correspond to what our total product is. So if I took this curve up here, this might not be drawn to scale, but I should get 20 here. Because that means at 2 units of labor, on average, I'm getting 10 per unit of labor, but total product for 2 units of labor is just the 10 times 2, which would get me 20. So I'll erase these numbers so that I don't run into any confusion later. But that's the first main relationship between average and total. And remember, average should start at the same place as total and as marginal, as I'll get to in a second. Because of course, if you have 1 unit of labor, your average is your total. It's just whatever that 1 unit produces. So the next thing that I'll talk about is the marginal product. So the marginal product is what you can think of as the slope of this total product curve, if you like that. Or it's really just the change in, it's what the next unit of labor gets you. So if I add 1 more unit, the marginal product of that worker is just the change in the total product from adding that worker. So what our marginal product says is, if I add another worker, how much additional, what's my change in total product here? So the slope of that curve. So let's say I go from 3 to 4 workers here. 3 workers got me a total product of, let's say 30. 4 workers got me a total product of, let's say, 50. Then I could say that the change from adding that additional worker is 20. When I went from 3 to 4 workers, I got a total product of 20 more units. But that 20 units is exactly what our marginal product is here. So obviously this isn't to scale entirely. But when I add the 4th worker, I get 20 additional units, and that's what our marginal product is. Okay, so you can see then that we reach a maximum here on our marginal product curve. So this maximum is exactly when the slope of this is as steep as it gets. So when the additional output that I get from the next worker is at its peak. So when I shift from here to here, it looks like the maximum is right about 4 here. So the slope of this line is as steep as it gets the whole time, because our marginal product is at its maximum. The next worker got me more than any other additional worker would get me. So that's the next thing to notice, is that this marginal product is at a maximum at the steepest point of the slope, when the next worker gets me the most. Okay. Another relationship. So notice that marginal product can become negative. So at some point or another, adding another worker actually gets us less total output, right? So the next worker decreased our total product. So that means that this marginal product here, where marginal product is 0, should correspond to the maximum point on our total product curve. So the idea is that now I go from all these workers here, they got us less additional output, but they still got us a positive additional output. So by adding, so from going from this worker, you know, the 5th worker to the 6th worker, right, I still got positive X product. So he added me 10 here, right? So his marginal product was 10, which means that between 5 and 6, total output needed to have gone up by 10, which is fine. So output's still increasing with the amount of labor that I put in. But as soon as this number becomes 0, I switch from adding total output with labor to losing it. So when marginal product becomes negative, I get that the slope of this line should start decreasing now. Because now when I add labor, it's decreasing my total product, which means I have a negative marginal product, which is this region here. Alright, the last big relationship that I want to talk about is the relationship between this average product curve and the marginal product curve. Alright, so we notice that the average product curve here is at a maximum exactly when it crosses the marginal product. Right? Average product reaches its peak when it crosses marginal product. So the intuition behind that is that, you know, if you say, a good example is, say, a grade point average. Say I have a GPA of 3.0. If I take my marginal class, if I take one more class and I get, say, an A in it and I get a 4.0, that'll bring up my grade point average. Right now maybe I'll have a 3.2 or something. So as long as your marginal product is above your average product, so as long as my GPA I get in my next class is above what my, or as long as the grade that I get in my next class is higher than my GPA, it'll bring my average up. Or if you're a baseball player and say you have a batting average of 200, if I bat 300 in the next game, that's going to bring my average up. So the marginal keeps pulling up your average until your marginal touches your average, and then it starts pulling it back down. So now if I have a batting average of 300 and I bat 200 in my next game, it's going to pull my average down. So average product is at a peak right when it's equal to your marginal product. Okay, that was a lot of information. Hopefully you got something out of that, or you can pause the video, go back, and pick up on some of the subtleties there. And there's a lot more you can look at these curves too. There's a lot of information kind of hidden in here. So hopefully that just gave you a beginning idea of how these curves relate to one another and what they can tell us about the relationship between labor and product. Alright, so again, all these relationships seem complicated now, but it's really important that you kind of get these things down because they apply in tons of different areas of economics, and it's something that you really will have to understand when we talk about cost curves later, and in plenty of other topics that you'll get to as well. So this is just the beginning, but it's really important you understand this, so if you have any more questions, feel free to come into the Econ Tutoring Center.